Welcome to those watching online or on demand. We are in the middle of a series this morning that we are calling Rediscover. And there comes a time in the life of faith when we're invited to rethink some of the teachings that we've received, some of the assumptions that we've inherited. And while this process can feel really scary at times, it's something that we believe we have to press through if we're going to grow spiritually and experience more of the fullness of God's love. So one part of the life of faith that many people are rethinking right now is community, things like church attendance, small groups, things like that. So I grew up in church. I've been around the church as long as I can remember. And so went to Sunday school, went to youth group when I was in middle school. When I got to high school, I started playing football. And for my high school, we were real serious about football. In fact, when I was in high school, we won several championships, and we're just a really, really competitive team. And so when you were on the football team, it was like all-encompassing during the football season. You were like eating, drinking, sleeping, football. So there wasn't a lot of extra time for church and youth group and things like that. And so I started hearing about it from my friends, some of my youth leaders, stuff like that. Like, hey, we're not seeing you around as much. Like, you need to, be around church and things like that. And that was really good and really well-intentioned. But I began to feel that sense of pressure and eventually ended up quitting the football team and didn't play football my last 2 years in high school. Now, there's some of that was really good, had a lot of fun, a lot of good memories from that time, but there's part of me that still regrets not sticking it out and playing football and resents a little bit of the pressure that I received in that season. But if you've been around the church for a while, you've probably maybe experienced a similar kind of pressure. Maybe you've heard people quote or pastors preach on Hebrews 10:25 that says, "Don't stop meeting together with other believers," which some people have gotten into the habit of doing. Instead, encourage each other, especially as you see the day drawing near. And so they tell us, see, you need to make church attendance a priority. If you're not regularly attending church, then you're liable to fall into sin, or you're living in sin. You're not living according to the commandments of the New Testament. All of these things, there's just pressure. In fact, there was a church that my wife and I attended when I was going to seminary in Chicago, and they would actually take attendance every Sunday. They would pass a little book around, and you would have to fill it out. And if you weren't there 2 Sundays in a row, you'd be getting a call from the pastor. And it was meant in love, but it's maybe a little big brotherish at the same time too. I don't know. But now when we start hearing things like this and feeling this kind of pressure, usually we're going to respond as human beings in one of two ways, or maybe sometimes in both of these two ways. One is just to submit, right? So many of us, we want to follow Jesus, we love Jesus, and we read verses like what I just read, and we hear people in authority saying you need to be around church, and so we think, okay, this is just the way it is. This is the way. Let's do it, and so we do. But when we respond in this way, the problem is that we end up internalizing a sense of guilt, a sense of pressure, a sense of shame. And these things are the biggest enemies to the life of faith. And so the intentions, they may have well been very good, but they end up doing harm to our faith over the long haul. But then there's another way that we respond to this kind of pressure. I don't know about you, but these days, if someone's putting pressure on me to do something, more than likely I'm going to say, forget that, and go do the opposite, right? So when the church pressures people to come to church and participate in community as a matter of religious obligation, we end up driving people away. So many of us know deep down that this isn't a helpful way to motivate people or even to motivate ourselves. But now, you're probably saying to yourself at this point, like, wait, Scott, aren't you a pastor? Like, don't you want people coming to church? Like, aren't you just giving people an excuse not to come? It's a good question. I get it. It's important. And here's the deal. I care really deeply about this community and what we're building here at Santa Cruz Bible Church. And I want people, wherever you're at, whether it's here or somewhere else, to experience the beauty of community and belonging. But here's the deal, that community and that belonging can never, ever come at the cost of more guilt and shame. So if we're not participating in church out of some sense of obligation or some sense of religious duty, then why are we coming? Why are we here? What could possibly motivate us to give up a Sunday morning to be together instead of sleeping in or going to brunch or doing something else with a free Sunday, right? Well, I hope what we can see this morning is that instead of an obligation that weighs us down or piles on guilt and shame, community instead is the place where we can shelter from the storms that surround us. Community is ultimately the place where we can shelter from the storms that surround us. So let's begin with probably the most quoted passage about going to church and break down what it's saying and what it's not saying. This is Hebrews 10, starting in verse 23. Read along with me. It says, "Let's hold on to the confession of our hope without wavering, because the one who made the promises is reliable. And let us consider each other carefully for the purpose of sparking love and good deeds. Don't stop meeting together with other believers, which some people have gotten into the habit of doing. Instead, encourage each other, especially as you see the day drawing near." So in order to make sense of this, there's something that we've got to understand about reading the Bible. And it's this. The Bible was primarily written by people in oppressed communities to people experiencing oppression. Let me say that again. The Bible was written primarily by people in oppressed communities to people experiencing oppression. Now, there's some exceptions to that, but overall, this is like the dominant way of what we see in Scripture. And this has really, really massive implications for how we read the whole Bible, including the passage that we just read. Because normally, we all do this, and it makes sense. We read the Bible from our own experience. So most of us in the room this morning or watching online, we've got quite a bit of privilege. And that's not a bad thing, necessarily. Before you get defensive, it's not wrong or bad. It's just simply a reality. And so when we read biblical passages that were written by and for vulnerable people on the margins, we can often read ourselves and our experiences into these passages, and then we end up misunderstanding what they're trying to say to us. So what does all this have to do with Hebrews 10:25? Well, we know that the followers of Jesus in the first century, they were marginalized. They were persecuted. They were actively persecuted by the religious leaders of the day who believed that the way of Jesus was a perversion of the Hebrew faith. And at the same time, Christians at this point were often viewed with really deep suspicion by the Roman authorities. Why? Because Christians didn't pledge ultimate allegiance to the emperor or to the empire. Their ultimate allegiance was to Jesus and to God's kingdom. And this wasn't really popular with a Roman Empire that wanted everyone in the empire to worship the emperor as a god. And so at best, they would treat Christians with deep suspicion, and at worst, they treated them with outright hostility and violence. And so because of this, Christian communities, they experienced a lot of pain, a lot of grief, a lot of loss, and a lot of harm. And when that is your experience, then you need each other. You need each other just to survive. And so this author of Hebrews is telling his audience, and us, for that matter, this morning, that not that we need to keep meeting together out of some sense of religious obligation, do it because this is the way, or this is the right thing, or this is what you should do. He's telling us that we need to stay in community because if we don't, then we become even more vulnerable. So John Swinton, who's a theologian I really respect from the UK, he had this to say about followers of Jesus in the first century. He said, "Their response to the problem of evil and the existence of suffering was not to question God's goodness, love, and power, but rather to develop faithful forms of community within which the impact of evil and suffering could be absorbed and resisted and transformed as they waited for God's return. So what he's saying is that the first Christians didn't just sit around sort of philosophizing in abstract ways about, oh, why do bad things happen to us good people? No, they took the world as it was and said, bad things are happening. There's evil in the world. How do we help each other survive and even thrive in the midst of the awful things that are happening to us and around us? And that's ultimately what community is supposed to be. Community is the place where we weather the storms that rage around us in the world. Now, there's an interesting image of what this looks like in the life of Jesus that we see in Matthew 23. So in this passage, Jesus knows that he's just a few days away from being arrested and crucified, but he stops and he weeps over the city of Jerusalem and its people because he knows that the path their leaders have set them on is going to lead to their destruction. So listen to what Jesus says in this mindset. This is Matthew 23:37. He says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. Jesus says that he wants to gather God's people like a hen gathers her chicks under her wing. So this is really an image of what it looks like for the church to gather. Because when the world is a scary and dangerous place, we can gather together under Jesus' protective care. And the way we experience that care is supposed to be through each other. Now, at this point, some of you are probably thinking, like, there's all this talk about sheltering from storms of life and finding refuge from the world, and isn't this just the same old culture war language, right? Like, aren't you just making it sound like those of us inside in the church here this morning, like we're the good people, and everything outside the church, those people out there, they're the scary bad people that we need to be safe from? And this is also an important question. It's a good question. But remember, we always have to begin with recognizing that the Bible was written by people on the margins for people on the margins. And so Howard Thurman, he was a pastor and a theologian and a mystic in the 20th century. He was also probably one of Martin Luther King Jr.'s biggest mentors. He said this about the Christian faith and the church. He said that the basic fact is that Christianity, as it was born in the mind of this Jewish teacher and thinker, he's talking about Jesus, Christianity appears as a technique of survival for the oppressed. That it became, through the intervening years, a religion of the powerful and the dominant, used sometimes as an instrument of oppression, must not tempt us into believing that it was thus in the mind and life of Jesus. In him was life, and the light was the light of men. He's quoting John 1:4. So wherever Jesus' spirit appears, the oppressed gather fresh courage, for he announced the good news that fear, hypocrisy, and hatred, the three hounds of hell that track the trail of the disinherited, need have no dominion over them. So Howard Thurman is saying something pretty radical. He's saying that whatever faith you're practicing, if it doesn't result in good news for the poor and the marginalized, then it can't claim any relationship to the way of Jesus. And if this is true, and as we're going to see in a minute, I think it is, then the church should have always been the place where the most oppressed, the most vulnerable people in the world can take shelter from what they experience. This has always been the heart of Jesus. Listen to how one of Jesus' disciples, Matthew, describes Jesus' heart. Matthew 9:38. When Jesus, saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. See, Jesus has always seen people who are harassed and helpless and had compassion on them. He always makes space for them at the table, like we sang with Kate just a few minutes ago. But maybe you're thinking to yourself this morning that you're not an oppressed or vulnerable person. So why would you care about any of this? Why? Because if it's a safe place for vulnerable people, then it's a safe place for everyone. Safety for the most vulnerable is safety for all. You see, Jesus came to set the world right, including us. And that's ultimately what we mean when we talk about salvation as Christians, that God is taking everything wrong in the world and making it right, fully and finally. And so Jesus himself said this in his first ever recorded sermon in Luke's gospel. This is from Luke 4, verses 16 to 21. It says this: when he, Jesus, came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, as was his custom. And he stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set free those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of all the synagogue were fixed on him. And then he began to say to them, "Today, this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." See, Jesus has always had a special place for the poor, for the captives, for the blind, for the oppressed, and anyone who loves them or is at least trying their best to love them like he does. And the thing is that a community where the marginalized and the vulnerable are welcome, are safe, are protected, more than that, are honored, that's a community that everyone, no matter who you are or where you come from, will feel safe in. Now again, maybe you don't see yourself as poor and oppressed. Stay with me anyway, because here's the thing I've learned the hard way. None of us gets a pass on the storms of life. Have you or a loved one ever had cancer? Has someone you love been taken before their time? Do you feel like no matter how hard you work, you just can't seem to make ends meet? Do you worry that the world that we're leaving our kids, our grandkids, is meaner and harder than the one that was handed to us? Have you experienced abuse and maybe even trauma in a relationship? Have you bumped around in the darkness of anxiety and depression or some other mental health struggle? Have you or a loved one struggled with finding no hope at the bottom of a bottle or in a pill? Is your mental health negatively affected by all the awful things you see scrolling by on TV or on your social media feeds and you don't even know what to do about it? Are you facing the daily struggle of caring for someone whose needs seem bigger than you are? None of us gets a pass on these storms. And instead of leaving us out in the rain to get tossed by the storm, Jesus says, "Come here, come in, find shelter under my wings." And it's there, under Jesus' mother hen wing, that we gather every week. And when we do, we can begin to find ways to make life just a little bit easier for each other, a little bit more livable, a little bit less dark and dangerous. We can find ways to help each other stand up out of the storms of life and make it just one more week, and then just one more week, and then just one more week. And that's what the church was always supposed to be. The place where people come and sit with you and cry with you while you're in that hospital waiting room. The place where the strangers who love you bring you meals, or in our day and age, a DoorDash gift card and a bottle of wine when life gets tough. The place where you can honestly lament and grieve with others when the cruelty of the world feels like it's just too much. And the place that helps you remember that Jesus is with you, will never leave you, will never forsake you, that he's always there with his arm around your shoulder, no matter what comes your way. And I don't know about you, but I need that community. I know probably many of you feel the same way, but the last year has just felt very overwhelming. Like there's just so much happening, there's so much wrong in the world, and we feel so powerless to do anything about it. But it's in community, both here with folks at SCBC and others that love Jesus and want to follow in his way, that life feels a little bit more manageable. a little bit less like we're alone in the midst of the darkness, and a little bit like together we can make it through whatever's happening out there. And I want that experience for you too. And so if that sounds good, I want to invite you to be a part of this community where we believe that hope is for everyone. And when we say everyone, that means everyone. There's no one that gets left out of that. And so here at Santa Cruz Bible, that begins with Sundays. It starts with what we do here on Sundays, where we gather, right? We're together, we sing, we hear God's word to us, we find comfort in Jesus' presence with us. And look, I get it. Life is busy. My kids are involved in sports, and there's a ton of stuff that happens on Sundays. It's not a set aside or protected day in our culture anymore. But as often as you can be here, you'll find that you're able to go into your week and remember that you are not alone, that Jesus goes with you, with his arm around your shoulder, and that there are people who love you and look forward to seeing you every single week. And I want to invite you to make use of some of the connecting opportunities that we have, especially for you introverts in the room, and I get it. I have family members that are introverts. I've had my own battles with social anxiety over the years. I get it. But to say hi to someone that maybe sat near you after the service, or to stay and grab coffee and a snack in the lobby, or to stay for one of our connecting events that we do every so often, can really help you feel like you belong here, like you're part of this community. Then, for those of you who want to dive in a little bit more, at Santa Cruz Bible, we've got groups and classes where you can invest in your spiritual life and be known. I've had the really powerful experience of being in community with people that have seen some of the worst in me and still love me anyways. And that's what Jesus' community should be for all of us. And I want you to experience that as well. So our community groups for us are more permanent groups that meet throughout the year for connection, for community, for growth. And our classes, these are more seasonal opportunities that we have to get to know some new folks and invest in your spiritual growth as well without maybe more of the long-term commitment. And one opportunity I want to highlight as we move into the summer months is our summer book groups. Now, it's a chance to read, to invest in your own growth, but it's also a chance to maybe get to know some new people, to have some interesting discussion about things that maybe you haven't thought about or things that you're thinking about in a new way in this season. So I want to invite you to maybe consider jumping in on one of those groups over the course of this summer. And then serving. If you're at the point where you really want to feel some ownership in this community, we'd invite you to consider serving. And these are just creating spaces of hope for everyone. And it's not something that Matt or Dawn or Kim or Rebecca Christensen, our care pastor, or Dan, our tech and facilities director, or any other the staff and myself, it's not something that we can do by ourselves. It's something that we as a community have to do together. It takes a whole community to create spaces of hope for everyone. And so there's opportunities to serve on Sundays. There's also opportunities to serve midweek if you have a schedule that allows that. I know, especially in our kids and our facilities teams, there's high needs for volunteers right now. We'd invite you to consider that if that's a step that you're wanting to take. But there's opportunities not just to serve this church and this community on Sundays, but there's also opportunities to serve the larger community of Santa Cruz through some of our outreach teams, to have an impact beyond this campus so that people can experience the love of Jesus through our actions. And here's the thing, at the end of the day, we never want you to feel pressure to do something that you're not ready to do. The goal, and what I want for each and every one of you, is to find a place, a community, where you experience shelter from the storms happening in the world and in your life right now. One of my favorite memories over the last few years happened a few years ago. I was on a school trip back to Michigan. And if any of you have spent time or lived in the Midwest during the summer, you know that there are some crazy thunderstorms that happen in the Midwest. I mean, just insane. So it was back in Holland, Michigan for school. And one night, me and a couple friends go to grab some dinner, and we're having dinner and drinks at this place called Butch's, which is actually a much nicer restaurant than Butch's makes it sound. But that's a story for another day. But we're in this restaurant having dinner, and there's this thunderstorm that starts up outside. I mean, there's just lightning going off like every second, thunder, there's crazy rain outside, but we're inside, and we're safe, and we're enjoying good food and having good drink and just an amazing conversation with each other for like an hour and a half, 2 hours. And then the storm lets up, and we go outside together. And to me, that's one of my favorite memories, just because it was with people that I really enjoy being around, really good food, shelter from the storm. And that to me is sort of this image or this metaphor of what the church always is supposed to have been. The place where you come, the place where you enjoy being together, the place where good things are happening around you. And even though the storms are raging outside, we're safe, we're warm, we're dry, we're with people that we love, no matter what's going on outside. Would you pray with me? Father, you know more than we do that the world outside is a crazy place. And there is so much hate, there's so much harm, there's so much violence, there's so much that's happening through no fault of our own to us and to people that we love. And so I pray that this community, that each of us would be committed to this space being a safe place. A place for those on the margins, a place for those experiencing storms, a place that people want to come because of how they experience love and compassion and ultimately you and your presence every single time they come here. And I pray for those who are hurting and going through the storms of life right now. And I pray that their experience would be that you put your arm around them, that they sense your love just holding them close, wrapping them up and protecting them no matter what comes their way. And I pray that we, the people that are around them, their community at Santa Cruz Bible Church, would be that tangible reminder, that tangible hands and feet love of Jesus in their lives, so that the world, even if it's still crazy out there, feels a little more bearable every single day. Amen.